How to stop fear from controlling your life. It starts like this. You're standing at the edge of a moment you've prayed for, prepared for, waited for, and yet your body locks up as if you've been ambushed by the invisible hand of fear. The opportunity is right in front of you, but your mind whispers 100 ways it could all fall apart, replaying them like a cruel highlight reel. In that split second, fear doesn't just visit, it takes control, grabs the steering wheel, and tells you to step back, shrink, retreat. Today, we're going to unlearn that prison and talk about how to stop fear from controlling your life, through the lens of Stoicism, reality, and your own courage waiting under all the noise. 1. Understand what fear really is. Fear is not a monster, it's a messenger. But the problem is that most people treat fear like a dictator with absolute authority rather than a suggestion you can accept or decline. Stoicism teaches that fear begins not in danger, but in perception, in the mind's interpretation of events rather than the events themselves. What ruins people is not the thing they fear, but the meaning they attach to it. And if you can understand fear at its core, you can strip it of 70% of its power before you even fight it. One of the most important lessons I learned about fear came from a very real moment in my own life. The day I had to speak in front of a group of people I deeply respected. I wasn't scared of the people. I was scared of what it would mean if I failed. That's what fear often is. Not the moment, but the imagined consequence. Once I learned that distinction, the fear didn't vanish, but it became smaller, less tyrannical, less towering over me like a shadow pretending to be a mountain. The Stoics were masters of breaking fear down into parts. Marcus Aurelius would ask, "What is this thing I'm scared of? What is it really made of?" That's where power begins. When you separate the event from the emotional story wrapped around it, fear loses its camouflage. For example, the fear of confronting someone isn't really about their reaction. It's about your fear of discomfort, awkwardness, or rejection. Fear always hides itself behind something else, and the secret is learning to pull the curtain back. Fear also shows up as physical symptoms: a racing heart, sweaty palms, tight breathing. But the Stoics remind us that feelings are just sensations. They don't predict the future, they don't define your strength, and they definitely don't mean you're in danger. When your heart races, you're not dying. Your body is preparing you to respond. But because the mind mislabels these sensations, people panic at the feeling instead of the situation. Understanding that your body is on your team changes everything. Lastly, fear becomes unmanageable when you try to outrun it. That's the paradox. The more you avoid it, the more power it gains. But when you face it, study it, and question it, fear becomes a tool instead of a trap. It becomes something you can work with, not something you run from. And that is the first transformation you must go through. 2. Identify the root cause of your fear. Most people don't fear what they think they fear. They fear what the fear represents. And when you don't understand where the fear comes from, it becomes this giant, confusing force that controls your decisions without you even realizing it. Stoicism pushes us to trace emotions back to their source, because if the root remains hidden, the behavior will continue, no matter how much motivation or positivity you throw at it. For example, one of the biggest fears I used to carry was the fear of disappointing people. But the truth is, I wasn't scared of people. I was scared of losing approval. I was scared of being seen as incompetent. I was scared of something inside me I didn't want to admit, that I tied my self-worth to how others saw me. This fear made me overthink every decision like I was performing for an invisible audience. And until I admitted the root, the fear stayed powerful. Fear often comes from childhood scripts, moments when we learned that mistakes equal punishment or that failure equals embarrassment. Stoicism acknowledges this, but it also reminds us that we are not condemned to repeat patterns from the past. Once you trace the fear back to where it started, you gain the ability to rewrite it. You stop being controlled by echoes and start responding to reality instead. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not external events." But the hidden part of that message is this: you also have power over your past interpretations. You don't have to keep reacting as if you're still the child who was yelled at, ignored, or shamed. You can choose a new meaning. Fear dissolves when the old meaning no longer defines the moment. Another powerful way to find the root is to ask yourself, what am I really scared will happen? Then ask again, and what would that mean? Then once more, and why does that matter to me? If you ask this 3 times, the truth reveals itself. The fear of failure often becomes a fear of embarrassment. The fear of confrontation becomes a fear of losing connection. The fear of taking risks becomes the fear of losing the illusion of control. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. Sometimes the root cause is pride. Fear is often disguised ego. You're scared to fail because you're scared to look imperfect. You're scared to try because you're scared to be seen struggling. But the moment you admit this, your fear becomes manageable. You can work with honesty. You can't work with denial. When you find the root, you take away fear's anchor. Everything above it collapses. And suddenly, fear becomes something you understand, not something that controls you. 3. Limit media consumption. Fear doesn't always grow from within. Often it's injected into you. The world has mastered the art of amplifying fear because fear grabs attention and attention makes money. If you consume too much media, news, social feeds, online catastrophizing, you'll begin to fear things you've never even experienced personally. Stoicism teaches that the mind becomes what it repeatedly consumes, and if you feed it chaos, you will think the world is chaos. The truth is, fear spreads faster than facts. News outlets don't sell calm. Social media doesn't reward peace. The world is constantly broadcasting the worst-case scenarios of humanity in high definition, 24/7. But your mind wasn't built to absorb global tragedy every 30 minutes. Your nervous system isn't designed to respond to every crisis as if it's happening in your own neighborhood. This constant exposure creates artificial fear, fear that isn't based on your life, but on the world's noise. Here's why this matters. Your mind cannot tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat if the stimulus is strong enough. When you consumed fear-based media, your body enters survival mode for things that will never touch your actual life. You begin to live in a state of hyper-alertness, expecting danger around every corner. This is how fear becomes a lifestyle rather than an emotion. Limiting media doesn't mean being uninformed. It means being purposefully informed. It means choosing what enters your mind instead of letting algorithms decide your emotional stability. The Stoics themselves avoided unnecessary information, not because they were ignorant, but because they valued clarity and peace. They understood that the mind becomes weak when it is constantly reacting to noise it cannot influence. One of the most powerful changes you can make is replacing consumption with creation. The more you focus on your own life, your goals, your responsibilities, your growth, the less you have time or space to drown in the fears of the world. Fear loses power when you stop feeding it with stories that are not yours. And when your mind becomes quieter, you finally hear your own courage again. 4. Stop feeding fear with imagination. Most fear comes from imagination, not reality. The human mind is so good at generating what-ifs that it can terrify itself even in perfectly safe situations. Stoicism teaches that fear is often the misuse of creativity, the ability to construct entire disasters that haven't happened and may never happen. And when imagination becomes fear's servant, your courage slowly starves. Think about how many times you've imagined something going wrong before it even happened. You imagine the conversation turning awkward, the presentation going badly, the project failing, the relationship ending. Your mind creates a full movie, a whole plot, with background music and lighting included, and then convinces you that the movie is reality. But imagination is only dangerous when you forget it's imagination. Marcus Aurelius would deliberately visualize the worst-case scenario, not to panic, but to strip it of shock. Once you see the worst clearly, you stop exaggerating it. You stop giving it mystical power. The Stoics practiced this because they understood a universal truth. Fear thrives in vagueness. When the mind doesn't know the specifics, it fills in the blanks with horror. But when you bring fear into the light, it becomes small, manageable, sometimes even ridiculous. Another reason imagination fuels fear is that people rarely imagine themselves capable. They imagine themselves helpless, humiliated, or failing. But what if you imagined yourself strong, prepared, resilient? What if your mental movies showed you overcoming instead of collapsing? Your imagination can either imprison you or empower you, and both are rehearsals for reality. One powerful exercise is to separate the imaginative story from the actual facts. Ask yourself, what do I actually know, and what am I inventing? This is like clearing fog from a window. Suddenly you can see what's real and what's fantasy. And the moment you stop believing every story your mind tells you, fear loses its grip. Your imagination is a gift, but if you don't learn to control it, fear will use it against you. 5. Sit with your fear. This is the part people avoid the most. Not fighting fear, not running from fear, but sitting with it. Fear grows when avoided. Fear shrinks when observed. The Stoics believed that emotions become harmless when you're willing to feel them without judgment. This is not weakness. This is mastery. Anyone can run. Few can sit. When you sit with fear, you learn that the sensation you've been avoiding will not destroy you. The racing heart will slow. The shaking stops. The thoughts lose intensity. Fear is like a wave. It rises, peaks, falls, then disappears. But most people never experience the fall because they flee during the rise. When you sit through the rise, you teach your nervous system something powerful. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it is not dangerous. The more you sit with fear, the more familiar it becomes. Familiarity is the enemy of fear because fear thrives on the unknown. When you willingly step into the feeling, the unknown becomes known, and the emotion becomes something you can handle. Stoicism teaches that you cannot control emotions, but you can control your response to them. Sitting with fear is how you build that response. Here's the truth most people don't know. Fear has something to say. Not to frighten you, but to guide you. Sometimes fear tells you where you need to grow. Sometimes fear points to the areas of your life where confidence waits to be built. Sometimes fear highlights what you value. When you sit with fear, you can finally hear the message underneath the noise. Sitting with fear also builds emotional endurance, the ability to stay grounded even when uncomfortable. This is how people become unshakable, not by eliminating fear, but by learning to remain still while it's present. The Stoics weren't fearless. They were simply practiced. They understood fear as a visitor, not a ruler. When you learn to sit with fear, you take your power back. Fear may arrive, but it won't decide your actions. It may speak, but it won't be the only voice you hear. Conclusion: fear doesn't disappear because you learn a few tricks or motivational slogans. It transforms because you transform. When you understand fear, trace its roots, limit the external noise that feeds it, stop letting imagination exaggerate it, and learn to sit with it. You reclaim control over your life. Fear becomes information rather than intimidation. It becomes something you can use instead of something that uses you. The real victory isn't eliminating fear. It's eliminating its authority over your choices. And here's the part that matters most. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is choosing action in the presence of fear. That's what the Stoics knew, lived, and mastered. Life doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards the brave, the steady, the ones who walk forward even when their voice shakes. Fear will always knock, but it no longer has to enter. Today you step into the life waiting behind the fears you've outgrown.